Failure to Unite is our fifth video in the series, Why South Africa is Getting Poorer. The story is for every South African listening. We were not born divided. Our land is older than the borders men drew with ink. Long before the arrival of ships and soldiers, Khoi, San, Nguni and Sotho peoples lived, worked, traded and loved here. Later, Dutch and British settlers, Malay slaves, Indian traders and many others made this soil their home, sometimes by choice, sometimes by force. In the years of apartheid, a system of law made identity a cage, and despite the negatives, a strong country was built. In the years since 1994, a new promise was made to heal, to share, to belong. But promises are fragile when inequality yawns like a scar across a nation. Listen, inequality in South Africa is not an abstract number. Measured across the decades, our country sits among the most unequal on the planet, a truth economists and surveys keep returning to. The poorest still carry a weight no free democracy promised them would survive. When people feel left behind, they look for absolutes, a simpler map, a purer identity, a place to protect. That longing can birth conservation and culture, but it can also birth division. In recent years, the contributions of our forefathers, of every race and culture, served to maintain our borders. However, those contributions have been trampled upon by groups calling for regional autonomy, and even secession calls have grown louder in some corners of the country. Talk of outs and ins, of enclaves and exclusive towns, feeds on despair and fear. Places like Orania or movements that seek a separate Western Cape speak to long histories and real grievances, but they also warn us what happens when the social contract frays. Politics has changed hands and faces since 1994. A generation of leaders from the liberation era built institutions and a narrative of national rebirth. By the mid-2020s, the political landscape had shifted. Long dominant parties lost their iron grip, new forces rose, and debate turned sharp and often public. Elections in 2024 reshaped the map of power in ways that surprised many, a sign perhaps that anger, service delivery failures, and rising needs do not wait politely for policy. What are the real dangers if we allow these fractures to widen? First, violence. History, our own, and that of divided societies elsewhere, teaches that when identity becomes the currency of politics, disagreements cease to be debates and become battles. The 2021 unrest reminded us how quickly stores, supply chains and lives can be shattered, and how fragile order can be when rage finds fuel. The cost was measured in lives lost, livelihoods destroyed, and trust burned. Second, economic collapse at the local level. The Western Cape, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal. These are not just provinces on a map. They are economies interwoven by trade, labor and trust. If regions separate, whether by law or by practical withdrawal of cooperation, supply chains splinter, investment flees, and the very services that keep people alive, hospitals, water, electricity, are harder to run. For the poor, the elderly, the disabled, that unraveling is not theory, it is disaster. Third, the erosion of rights. Our Constitution is a hard-won scaffold that protects speech, movement, property and dignity. When the state fragments or when fear of the other becomes policy, protections become negotiable. Minorities within minorities, farm workers, migrant communities, LGBTQ+ people, small religious groups, suffer most when protections weaken. The sacrifices of anti-apartheid activists, of ordinary black, colored, Indian and white South Africans who resisted oppression, were made to build a country where rights are equal, not selective. We must remember those sacrifices as anchors, not relics. We owe them our vigilance. But there is also another story threading through these dangers, one of courage, creativity, and shared sacrifice. Men and women of every background built infrastructure, taught children, bore arms and bore burdens. Black, colored, Indian and white, both Afrikaans and English activists, paid the price for freedom and led the transition from repression to democracy, fought and organized for community dignity, helped shape labor law and civic life. Poets and liberals added voice and soul to our public life. These contributions are not footnotes, they are the scaffolding of a nation. Any story of division that fails to honor them is incomplete and dishonest. So where does that leave us? Tense, angry, fearful, but not without a choice. We can respond to fragmentation by retreating into our tribes, by building walls that keep out both the wound and the cure. Or we can do something harder. We can build institutions that actually redistribute opportunity, not just rhetoric. We can demand accountable local governments that show service delivery, not patronage. We can teach a national history that is honest about wrongs and generous about contributions, and we can guard the Constitution not as a partisan shield, but as a common promise. Today's story is not meant to frighten for the sake of fear. It is meant to rouse. The dangers are real. Economic implosion in pockets, surges of violence, loss of rights, and the moral cost of forgetting the many hands that built this country. But the remedies are human too. Courage, stubborn compassion, creativity, and a refusal to let trauma be weaponized into division. If you are a teacher, a farmer, a teenager, a mayor, a shopkeeper, a nurse, a student, your actions matter, so do mine. We can choose the easy old scripts of blame, or we can write together a new one that honors the kitchen hands and the generals, the miners and the musicians, the voter and the volunteer. We can do that by insisting on dignity, by holding leaders to account, by building real economic inclusion, and by refusing to let fear redraw our map. Remember, a country that refuses to acknowledge everyone's sacrifices risks losing its soul. If we are to be a South Africa that endures and prospers, we must become in thought and action, first and foremost, united and proudly South African. If these words moved you, don't keep them to yourself, share this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments, follow for more wisdom, because together we can build a better South Africa.